Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm your host, Malika Kumar, Marketing Lead at Benchmark Corp. I want to begin my remarks by encouraging all of us to acknowledge the lands we are meeting on, the traditional territory of many nations. I want to recognize the land Benchmark Corp is located on the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation, the traditional keepers of this traditional territory and treaty land. I am so fired up this afternoon as Benchmark and Palo Alto present you with the leadership panel with C-suite executives from the security arena. I'm here to encourage upcoming young women in cyber to learn from each other at diversity focused companies. It's my pleasure to welcome our distinguished leaders on the panel, customers, partners, and a sponsor, Palo Alto, and for most importantly, our guest. Thank you everyone for joining us today. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Our speakers will address them at the end. Cybersecurity is still a male-dominated industry, and this gender bias leads to a false perception that women don't have a place in this profession. Last year's Women in Cybersecurity report from ISC found that while younger women are pushing into the industry, nearly half of the female cybersecurity professionals surveyed were millennials. Women still make up just 24% of the overall cyber workforce. This impacts who is included in the meetings, who gets promoted into leadership roles, and ultimately the entire makeup of an organization's culture. When women don't see themselves at the table, the stereotype that tech jobs are just for men can become a self fulfilling prophecy. Companies that also want to make gender diversity a core value need to start with the hiring process and devote extra time and resources to finding diverse candidates and then supporting them once they're hired. Though it's a booming industry that will have an estimated 3.5 job openings by the end of 2021. Cybersecurity often not on a lot of younger women's radars. There's a lot of lack of awareness surrounding high-paying jobs in the industry that don't require a degree. There are plenty of tech leaders who don't have STEM backgrounds. Ensuring more women are entering cybersecurity companies requires clearer pathways to thrive. There needs to be greater awareness about ways to break into the industry and the large range of roles available, which our panelists will discuss today. Cybersecurity is challenging, lucrative, and rewarding career that women shouldn't be missing on. It's my honor to introduce the moderator, Kelly Irwin, CIO at the Electrical Safety Authority, who focuses on evolving the digital and cyber mandates for business value. She's value driven, leading with a strong sense of responsibility to create positive change. Kelly is an active supporter of women in tech through mentoring, coaching, blogging, and speaking events. She launched a book in October 2020 about women in tech with her co-author Deborah Christmas titled Please Stay. The book recognizes 21 talented women in tech and provides tips on how to survive and thrive. Over to you, Kelly.
Thanks, Malika. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to be here today. I will do a brief introduction of our two esteemed panelists, and then I will throw some questions at them to get really their input and perspective on their careers in cyber. So Jeanette Lee Hung is joining us today. She is the Director of Prisma Cloud Global Channel at Palo Alto. As a proven sales leader in the IT industry, Jeanette strives to create effective, innovative solutions to achieve on-target, revenue-enhancing results through strategizing, sales, marketing, and business development processes and approaches. Jeanette started her career in the IT industry with a regional VAR, Salt Springs Software, and as a sales rep. Her career progressed with them until she became a field sales rep, a regional sales manager, and ultimately, after an acquisition by CompuCon, was promoted into a national sales director role. So you don't hear cyber yet in those words. Since that time, and over the past 20 years, Jeanette has worked with boutique VARs and service partners in sales, solution development, and channel roles, both as an individual contributor and as a leader. Prior to Palo Alto Networks, she was with NetApp initially as a channel manager and became a commercial sales leader. Jeanette has now been with Palo Alto Networks for almost 5 years, where she started as a regional sales manager, promoted to the national channel leadership role 3 years ago, and has recently been promoted to a director role for the Prisma Cloud Worldwide channel. So welcome to Jeanette.
Thank you, Kelly.
I will now introduce Michelle Mullen. She is the Director General for our Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. Michelle is the Director General of Partnerships and Risk Mitigation at the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. The Partnerships and Risk Mitigation Directorate is responsible for providing IT security advice, guidance, and services to Canadian critical infrastructure organizations, and for advancing collaborative relationships with private industry to strengthen the cybersecurity practices in Canada. She was previously the Executive Director of the Canadian Committee on National Security Systems and External Compliance. The Canadian Committee on National Security Systems ensures that CSC's IT security authorities are executed and complied with externally across the Government of Canada, as well as managing and implementing the risk and compliance framework for Canada's national security systems. So welcome to Michelle. So I'm excited to be here today and have these two fantastic panelists with their very, very strong and deep technical experience over the years. And they will share with you not only some aspects about their career journey, but also their enthusiasm for cybersecurity. So I'll start with you, Jeanette. And as I was getting to know you over the last few weeks and really looking into your background also, you started with a business degree and studied social sciences. So I put that together and think for people who believe you need to have a degree in cybersecurity or a degree in STEM or computer science in order to get into this industry, you're a great model for them to realize that it's not necessarily where you start, but where your interests lie that can bring you into this type of career. So why don't you give us a little bit of information about what attracted you into cyber and some of the lessons that you learned through other jobs that enabled you to be qualified and ready for that job?
Right. Thanks, Kelly. So interesting you should mention the social piece. I started that at Fanshawe College in London and never finished. I always had an interest in understanding people, the way people thought and the way in which we interact at a deeper level. And as my career progressed, ironically, I am now in the cyber industry in a world where those aspects of how we understand people, the way they think, the way they act, become very, very important. So what I would say is my curiosity to better understand the world around me is really what brought me to cybersecurity, because it is consistently changing. There's always new information. There's always the next things to read. And our curiosity around people and what they're doing and how we impact each other is almost at the core of understanding the malicious activities that happen on the not so great part of cybersecurity. So the curiosity really drove me there.
That's awesome. Michelle, a similar question for you. I know that you studied psychology and business. You didn't have a STEM degree, and you're in a role now where you're not only in a cybersecurity role for the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, but also influencing our federal government and some of our private industries. So sort of what would lead you from studying psychology and people and maybe motives, if I could say it that way, to the role that you're in today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So I actually started out my career in uniform as an officer in the Canadian Forces, and so I had gone through the military college system to obtain that first degree that you talked about, which was actually in what they called applied military psychology, and that was really focused on the use of information and misinformation and disinformation in terms of military tactics. and how, throughout the history of warfare, that's evolving. And so I think, looking back now, it really did set the stage fairly naturally for a progression into what is now the fifth domain of war, which is cyber, right? And I think, although I did start out with that psychology degree, very early on, I was really fascinated by the sort of behavioral analysis that goes into cybersecurity to try to figure out what it is that the adversary is going to do next, so that you can then leverage the technical capabilities you've got to try to thwart those actions before they're actually taken. And so I think that's really part of it. But starting out in uniform, I was actually an air transportation specialist, and I did aircraft weight and balance calculations on aircraft in order to deploy, people and equipment overseas. And I think what it boils down to for me, the crux of the interest is it's all about problem solving. Back then my problem was how to keep a really heavy aircraft full of fuel and equipment in the air over a long distance. Now it's, how to block the efforts of these particular threat actors before they get into our networks.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so, Michelle, a bit of follow-up on that. So we are talking about how there are not that many women in STEM in general, and certainly not that many women in cyber careers. And, we can all read books and statistics and say, oh, this is bad. Okay, let's accept that it's bad and that we want to change it. So what do you see as some of the challenges for us to attract women into those careers? Because when I look at your background and the way you describe it, and you talk about information and misinformation and how the military uses that, like that's so aligned to cyber. And I think both of you have sort of raised the point that it is about human motives and human actions. It's not so much, person sitting in a basement in a dark room studying code to have a cyber career. So what do you see as some of the challenges for women to break into the field that maybe we're representing the wrong way to them?
Sure. So in my opinion, there's sort of three different, I'll say, perceptions that are at play that I think are involved in blocking women from even considering this career path at the outset. And first, I would say it really is known to be a fairly tough work environment. There's not a lot of people that have the skills necessary to get into the career, or so it would seem. There tends to be a lack of resources available for people to do cybersecurity at various companies, because it's really a more recent thing for the C-suite to understand the importance of investing in cybersecurity. So I think it's long had a perception of being sort of a struggle to get the resources you need from both a human and financial perspective, as well as the unpredictability of the schedule. So cyber incidents can happen in the middle of a weekend, in an evening, and there's that perception that all cybersecurity jobs must be involved in incident response, which also isn't true, but it is absolutely a perception. The second one is what I'd call the hostile lexicon, and this is really that neuro-linguistic context. When we describe the job of cybersecurity, we use words like malicious threat actors and dark web and attack and harm and all of these things, which are all true, but I think the way that comes off is like it's an environment that the average woman might not find comfortable, because we tend to be more focused on human interaction and problem solving and helping business through a difficulty. So I think one of the main things we have to focus on is changing that undertone and the lexicon we're using to describe the job. And then finally, it's that whole global forces are against us concept. And one example of that would be there's actually a rapid response mechanism that the G7 nations put together to sort of report and watch for covert and clandestine activities of the malicious type against during election processes in the G7 countries. And during our Canadian election back in 2019, the lead up to that, this G7 group actually pointed out that there were very clearly foreign threat actors that were attempting to influence the outcome of the federal election here in Canada. And they actually leveraged things like gender equality and that sort of thing to discourage the political involvement of women in that election process. And many of you probably remember seeing some of our most well-known female politicians going on camera to talk about the toll it was taking on their lives, and that it just didn't seem worth it to them, and they didn't understand why it was happening. So that's the third thing that I think would really need to change for people to feel comfortable stepping into this arena, because it does feel pretty dark when you look at it, you know, on the face like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Michelle. So Jeanette, just building on that, it sounds like there are aspects that it's how we portray the careers that could be holding people back. But talk a little bit about your experience now that you're in a cyber career. Are you the only woman among, you know, mostly men, or are you finding there are more women joining this career? Like what is that gender imbalance that you're experiencing personally?
So, Kelly, I think it's what you're hitting on is really an interesting point. I worked for a cybersecurity company, not necessarily on a cyber defense team, and so the vast number of opportunities for people to become in cybersecurity don't always include ones and zeros. It isn't always hands and keyboards. There are lots of other opportunities to be involved in the industry that may or may not include actually, you know, preventing the attackers from taking what's valuable to us. So just as any other business, there are needs for people in sales, there are needs for people in marketing, there are needs for people in absolute leadership positions. So there's lots of areas that we can look at as opportunities for people to join the cybersecurity industry that may or may not be actually frontline workers in needing to know the ones and zeros. And what we're striving for at Palo Alto Networks is really, we would love to see that 50-50 balance. And we're working really hard towards that. But on the channel side of the organization, we're doubling year over year how many women are in positions of leadership. So understanding that there is absolutely more than one vision that needs to be at the table when making decisions on how we approach the market is become such an important component that we are mandating it as part of the way that we go to market.
Oh, that's really fantastic to hear. I think the focused attention and even just talking about the goal of attracting more women is maybe not moving as fast as some of us would like, but is showing us that, you know, if you set goals, we can make most goals happen. It's more, are we acknowledging that there is a challenge, and are we taking specific actions, or are we just assuming that it will happen by itself, which, you know, hasn't been true for the last 20 years. So for Michelle, if you think about, you know, initiatives to attract and retain more women, I think that in discussions I have, people end up sort of polarized a bit. Like, should we have specific initiatives to attract women, or should we have initiatives to attract talent? And sometimes when people say that, they almost make it like we'll get talented people who look like men, or we'll get women, as opposed to, don't we think there are talented women out there? Which clearly we all believe there are. But do you think specific initiatives are what we need to be looking at? And if you do, you know, what components of that do you think help make it successful?
Sure. So I think all of the above is necessary, right? And it's really about targeting whatever the initiatives are that you undertake to make sure that you get that cross-functionality of backgrounds and interests and types of people. We want diversity amongst our workforce. We want a broad demographic to pull from, because we're trying to, like I said, outpace threat actors who come from very diverse backgrounds and have all kinds of perceptions and perspectives. And in order to really get ahead of them, we need that same variation in our perspectives and perceptions to bring to bear as we sort of head them off the path. So we're involved at CSE, at my home organization, in a lot of different initiatives. Some are very much focused on women and sort of growing interest in women in STEM. So for example, you've probably heard of Hacker Gal. We're very active in supporting, you know, girls who want to learn to code and be hands-on keyboards and actually get involved in the cyber defense aspects of what we do. But we're also involved in a number of other initiatives. So for example, there's one called Digital Micmac, which is really focused on our Indigenous population and making sure that we give them the leg up in terms of not only learning about careers in cybersecurity, but starting to gain the skills they need to actually, you know, compete for those positions. And then more broadly, there's other ones. There's one called Civics, which is really nonpartisan, and it's focused on engaging young people to become good citizens at large and understand that democratic process and the part that social media plays in that democratic process now, and therefore how to stay safe online, and therefore that leads into cybersecurity. So there's a number of different angles you can come at this from, and I think that's the best dragnet of all, is to come at it from different angles with different points of interest, because it'll attract different folks from diverse backgrounds, and I think that's exactly what we need.
Is there anything you've seen, Michelle, where there's maybe a well-meaning group of people that say, if we did this, it would attract more women, that you feel is maybe misguided?
Not misguided, but I do think there are a number of groups that, so for example, I'm the corporate champion for Women in Defense and Security WIDS, which is a really large organization that's been around for a long time, that really is great at bringing together women from all across sort of different defense and security backgrounds to talk about the issues we've faced and so on. And I think that's really important. But I think we have to take a step into the action arena beyond talking about the fact that there's a statistics problem and that we need to attract more women. What are we doing to actually attract more women other than talking about the fact that there's an issue? And so I lean more towards some of the other initiatives that we're involved in. Like, for example, I've just recently started working with the University of Waterloo and a few others to explore changing the language we're using in those job descriptions in a neuro-linguistic kind of way, to start using language that would be more attractive to women, so that just at the outset the interest gets twigged. And frankly, you got to start early, because you know the average high school career counselor doesn't talk about cybersecurity as a career path when they're doing that counseling at the young teenage age. So I do think we've got to get in there earlier as well. So I don't think anybody's misguided, but I think we've got to take a few different steps there.
More opportunity. Yeah. So Jeanette, you mentioned that your company has a target or goal to increase that and be more 50-50. I think there's lots of diversity conversations we could have about many different groups of people, but today we're talking about women in cyber. So the approach that they're taking, could you elaborate a bit on, you know, some items that you've done that you think are really helping break that ground, and maybe some areas that you haven't explored yet that you're thinking of in the future?
Absolutely. One of the initiatives that we've taken on this year is when it comes to the interview process. So we're bringing in new employees to the company. There are some of our leaders that have insisted that half of the panel that is responsible for doing interviews are men and half of the panel are women, or there is at least, Michelle, to your point, diversity on that panel. So even if it means reaching out to a different area of the organization because maybe we are a little bit too heavy on one side, we're doing that to make sure that there's an equal view of the new people that we're bringing into the company. So I really appreciate that. To be very honest, it's been tough. Some of the organizations don't have that equality just yet, and they're a little bit further away than I feel that we want to be. So that's one big step in the right direction. We continue to build an internal team of women who are meant to inspire each other and connect and empower on a regular basis. And I believe that our women's network is up to about 1,200 people right now. And there are subgroups within every region of the world. So we're really doing things not only, you know, to help bring more women into the company, but then also to ensure that when you're within Palo Alto Networks, you feel supported. You're not standing alone on any mountain. So that's also helping to inspire our leadership to bring more diversity to the table. And then if we take a look at what we're doing to help impact more women coming into the industry, we've just launched an academy program. And I believe we're bringing in 40 new students in January. We'll be training them for 9 months to become more astute in somewhat of a solution architect type of role. They'll come to California, they'll learn all about cybersecurity. But we're looking at those people that we're looking at that roster being half women, half men. So bringing kids in at a university level and really at that point inspiring the fact that we need multiple lenses coming into this view is really important. So we're looking at a layered approach at how we're doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I worked at an organization where they had the idea also to have men and women on the selection committee or the interview committee, and I was the only executive female in technology at the time. So everyone who wanted to hire wanted me to interview their people, and I was like, I agree with your principle and your, intent, but so you're saying there are 9 of you and 1 of me, so I have to do 9 times the amount of work that you're doing. So maybe this is, not the only answer. So
That's right.
Let's get a few more women at the executive level so that we can share that workload. But I think those things, it does matter to get different perspectives for looking at the candidates and interviewing the candidates and making decisions on the candidates, so that we don't hire people who just look like us, whether we're male or female. So talk a little bit about what women may feel coming into the field. So Michelle, I think that you would probably agree with me. If someone came into your company and they were working in cyber and they met you, they would be inspired by you. They would say, oh, I can see that women can succeed and that there's career path. But if they didn't meet you, what is it going to feel like? And are they going to be in a mostly male dominated area? And sort of what's the feedback you're getting from new recruits, whether they're, right out of school or whether they're mid-career, what's their experience, good and bad?
So I think Malika said at the outset that ISC did a study in 2019 and that we're up to about 24% of sort of women in STEM-oriented positions. And I have to say, when I started my career in the late 80s, it was at 20%. So it hasn't gone up that much despite all of our efforts, which I find a little bit disheartening. But at my organization, at Communication Security Establishment, which is the parent agency where the Cyber Center resides, our chief, the head of our entire agency, is a woman, Shelley Bruce, and she's had a really stellar sort of 30+ year career with us. And in fact, her predecessor, our previous deputy minister, was also a woman. So I think any young women that come into CSE see that women can get right to the top and that it wasn't a one-shot thing. It wasn't a fluke. It is something that is embraced. We prioritize the hiring of women. We're at about 37% women at CSE, which is, I think, significantly higher than the average in the industry. And yet we're not satisfied with that. We are pushing towards higher and higher. In fact, I was going to say in 2019, about 47% of our hires were women. So we're definitely pushing that. And so I don't think there's any women at CSE that think they're the only woman in the room or see themselves as the only woman in the room. However, the truth that's there just under the surface of that is the nature of the role. So kind of to Jeanette's point, some of the heavily female-dominated roles are in some of the support elements of our organization, right? So in HR and finance and communications and all these very important roles, but in the hands-on keyboards, cyber defense and incident response areas, for sure the numbers are lower. And so I think the thing we really need to focus on is that openness to mobility within the organization across roles. And so right now I actually have a number of young women that I see huge potential in that are taking a secondary set of degree programs and formal education so that they can cross over, so to speak, from some of the support elements into the more technical elements. And they've already proven in spades that they're going to do well once they've got that sort of pedigree in place. So I think it's really encouraging, but we've got to do more for sure.
Yeah, thanks for that. And we had a question in the chat that I think is sort of connected to that. So in what areas would we like to see more academic research published? And I look to, the recruiting of people into cyber roles. And again, I highlight the background the two of you have, which is not STEM, which is not cyber. And we probably need more research, more understanding of what kinds of skills and qualities and education make someone a great candidate for a career in cyber. Not only for them to enter cyber and be happy because they make lots of money and it's very interesting, but for them to be really good at it. And I think we're just scratching the surface on what are this innate skills and interests in a human that make them very good at a cyber role. And I think the tie to both of you of psychology and social sciences and thinking and being curious about people and humans and interactions and motivations of, why they would attack allows you to be good at, how to prevent. So I think for me, that would be one area for STEM in general, for STEM careers, but also for cyber specifically. What are those traits in people? Then we can find those young people with those traits and encourage them, very early in life. So Jeanette, I'll sort of throw the question to you of, a real life story of women in cyber careers. What do you think they're experiencing today, and how is that different than what you would have seen 10 years ago? I mean, there are lots of studies that are telling us there are not enough people in general, not just women, but not enough people for all the cyber roles we need and all the services that companies and vendors are trying to provide for cyber. And so what does that feel like for someone entering the profession? Do they feel, extremely valuable, or do they feel extremely overwhelmed? Do they feel there's no way to get their job done? Back to, I think Michelle made a comment, do you think I have to work 24/7 in order to be successful in this career? What's it like for the person, on the ground?
Michelle mentioned something that I think is key for most companies they should be looking at is that internal mobility capability. So it's not always for businesses and looking externally to find people with skill sets that don't exist or are new. It's looking internally for people, to your point, Kelly, with curiosity and a really fearless type of attitude of going after what they want and understanding what the opportunity is in the career and nurturing that as a business. Coming into something like cyber can seemingly be overwhelming because there is a persona I feel out in the market, not even just in our industry, but initially taking a look at, think about what we're watching on TV. All of the shows 10 years ago about hackers were, to your point, guys in their basements, hoodies on, doing something they shouldn't be doing. And now fast forward, things, I think I was watching Criminal Minds the other day, and it was a woman who was leading the cyber team trying to figure out where the criminal was. And we see a lot more of that externally, which I think does nothing more than encourage girls to understand that this is not just for men. There's a lot of excitement, opportunity for girls, for women in the industry. So having external influences is also very important. Any new job has a feeling of being overwhelmed, but the network that we're able to build with the people around us that have seen success is what's going to help bridge that gap between bringing the girls in and then making them feel comfortable. So supporting each other helps feel that, you asked about the feeling of being overwhelmed. I think making sure that women feel supported is the key to that.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. One of the topics that we cover in my book is that women can be the only one, but they don't necessarily want to be. So, women can break the glass ceiling. Women can enter a team where they're the first woman. Women can show that they belong, at a table where they may be the only female who's got the skills of the rest of the team who are all men, and they can do these things, but they, the great skilled people are saying, but I don't want to be alone. I don't want to feel like I'm fighting every day. I don't want to feel like I'm being questioned and challenged just to have this seat at the table. So what's a great day for a woman in cyber? And if you think about, you come home at night and someone says, how was your day? And you go, today was awesome. What does that feel like? Like what would be the components that would add to that? I'll throw that to Michelle first.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, I think what comes to mind when you say, what was a great day, I kind of go back to that idea of finding something you really love and then figuring out how to use that background, that understanding to sort of get a step ahead of these malicious threat actors that we're talking about. So, my team works with critical infrastructure partners like we talked about. And so when we know, for example, that there are nation states that are probing our electricity networks, for example, to see if they can get a foothold to use down the line someday when they want to wreak havoc for whatever purpose. It's really about, once we know what it is that there's interest in, what can we do to prevent that from being successful? And so, I've got teams that are working right now on protecting the vaccine rollout, for example, in Canada, working with all of the vaccine producers and the whole distribution network for every step in the cold chain, because there were all kinds of threat actors trying to either steal intellectual property, divert vaccine doses for their own use, whatever their motivations were. And so it's fascinating to me when our teams go home every day saying, today we prevented vaccines from being diverted or not getting into people's arms at the end of the day. So I think when you can really see the impact of your work and how it affects society at large, that's a really good.
Yeah, and I think your example there, tying it to you understand how it impacts humans, right? Like to protect that vaccine rollout, that that's affecting people's lives and health. So it probably gives almost a double boost of feeling good about what you've accomplished. So Jeanette, sort of same question to you, and it doesn't have to be, the specific what was accomplished that day, but for a person, in the cyber career at any point of that team, like what feels awesome? What do you say, wow, this was the right decision, this project or this initiative or this team building exercise or like whatever it was, what does that feel like?
Yeah, you know what, I think Michelle kind of just mentioned something that I thought, there is absolutely no end to the list of projects that are available for someone to engage in as it relates to cyber. And so, at the end of the day, for me, looking back and saying I was able to educate someone that knew absolutely nothing about cybersecurity from a very non-cyber background myself to understand why, the fact that their tap that the water coming from is now connected to the internet in their house could create a dangerous situation for them as it relates to all their personal identity. Being able to make those personal connections, makes me feel like I know what the heck I'm talking about. And that's the beauty of this industry and the, cyber is there are so many areas that this goes down. So, being able to speak to that coming from a non-cyber background is each time that happens, I feel a little bit smarter and I feel like I'm making a bit of a difference, whether it's personal or professional.
Yeah, so let's go to the personal life moment here, Michelle. Like I always say I'm a cyber enthusiast, not a cyber expert, because I worry once you say you're an expert that people want to prove they know more than you. So, as an enthusiast, I feel like there are moments in my life, probably not daily, but at least monthly, where someone in your family or your friend group or your neighbor says, this is what they did, like with their passwords or with their accounts or with it. What's the cringe-worthy moment for you that people say that you think, how could you possibly be doing that? Don't you know the risk?
Oh, I don't know where to begin. Probably for me, the most cringe-worthy moment actually happened in my own four walls of my house, and I won't tell you which person in my family did it, but someone fell for one of those phone calls from a company that says they are the Windows operating system company and that they need remote access to your system in order to take care of a problem that they can see on their monitor, because of course they're watching everybody's desktop. And just just the fact that, the business that my agency is in, there's a perception that we do things like that, and we don't, because we don't focus on Canadians at all. But the fact that they would think, that anybody would think, that there are companies out there that are literally monitoring every human being's desktop and could legitimately help you with a problem before you even know you have one, that's a bit concerning to me. And so cringeworthy, but it kind of goes back to what Jeanette says. Everybody's at a different place in their journey, right, of understanding cybersecurity. Even as I talked about the vaccine rollout, when we first started working with the health sector at the onset of the pandemic, they were like hanging up on us. We were a distraction. They wanted nothing to do with us. They were busy trying to save lives. They didn't, there were people dying in long-term care facilities. The last thing they were worried about was cybersecurity. And it took my team a lot of effort, persistence, and using language that was familiar to them before they started to understand why it actually was a priority, and for them to let us in and start talking and working with them. And so it's come a long way in a very short time. But to me, that's the antithesis of the cringe, where that's the hooray kind of feeling moment, is when you finally see it switch and it dawns on them that this is for real and they need to pay attention.
Yeah. So Jeanette, I'll ask you the same, and not for you to out anyone in your family or friends, but what's the cringeworthy moment in your personal life that you can remember and want to lecture someone maybe?
It's all around passwords. People that don't change their password or use the original, password 123, and it's oftentimes the neighbors in the neighborhood that ask, "Hey, Jeanette, what do I need to do for this, that, and the other thing?" And when you hear, again, people in the neighborhood talking about what they're doing as it relates to what we know is the finite details of cyber, it is a little bit scary. Teenage boys are the worst too. I think probably many of us have those, and that's the other side of it, is those that think that they know more than they really actually do, and so they're testing the limits and trying to figure out how to hack the hackers is also a little bit scary. So, cringeworthy are people that really don't understand and are doing things that they shouldn't, and people that are doing more than they should and still creating the same issues is also a cringeworthy scenario.
Yeah, I can remember a day someone was showing me that they were proud that they'd written their PIN number on the back of their bank card so that they wouldn't forget it. And in that moment, you almost think, I don't even know how to educate you right now, but we probably feel, that it's our obligation to do so. So Michelle, tell us about one of the best days you've ever had at work that was really hard, like something that happened that maybe you didn't expect. And I'll share a brief story of my own. I was the CIO at another company, not where I am today, and we were hacked. And it was 72 hours before we got it under control. And I can still feel the anxiety right now of that. And I was sitting at my kitchen table and was didn't sleep for 72 hours, but I would my head would hit the table, and I would nod off for a minute or two because I was on the phone trying to get this under control for the whole time. And this is years ago, and I haven't lost that physical feeling of how intense that moment was. We subverted the production problems in the end, but these things no one can prepare you for. So I'm sure you have many of those kind of stories in the role you're in, but without outing any kind of gap that was in it, you could say it was a previous
sure. So anytime that we're involved in a cybersecurity incident, after we go through the first sort of notification stages, we typically put a non-disclosure agreement in place to make sure that whichever victim company is reaching out to us knows that we're not going to share who they are and the nature of their incident. So I certainly won't name names, but I think one of the best scenarios for me was fairly recently. We started working with a critical infrastructure organization in a sector that we didn't have a lot of experience working with, and slowly worked kind of gain that trust and start to have two-way dialogue. We've done a lot of one-way talking where we as the cybersecurity experts are pontificating at great length about how to have good cyber hygiene and do all the right things and to make sure people know what the risks are, what the threats are that face them. But we don't always get a lot back, and sometimes you're not sure if they're really listening or if they just think you're fear mongering or really, really know what you're talking about. But in this one particular case, and this just happened a couple of weeks ago, I was really starting to wonder whether this particular organization was taking it seriously, because I hadn't seen a lot of support from the CEO and sort of the top echelon. One echelon down, absolutely, but I just wasn't sure. And sure enough, sort of 2 weeks ago, I got in the middle of a weekend evening an outreach from one of the C-suite people at this particular organization that had seen something that worried them, and they wanted us to get involved, but not in a way that was really overt in case it was nothing. And we were able to sort of spin up our incident response team very quickly, and sure enough, it was something. And just the sigh of relief that came out of that organization after doing an outreach that they didn't need to do or wouldn't have done in the past, that all of a sudden they thought to do it. To me, that was sort of a goosebump worthy scenario, and it's happened many times, but this was sort of the most recent in an area where we really had very little experience working with that particular sector before. So we kind of feel like we're making good inroads there as a result.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific example because it's showing the acknowledgement of the value, right? And I think what happens with a lot of companies and even individuals is first, we're not sure it's a problem, so we don't want to overreact. And second, there's a bit of embarrassment, right? So I'm sure you've all had the scenario that we've encountered here where a family member reaches out and says, something's wrong with my computer. And you say, what did you do? And did you click any link? And did you have any? And nope. And then after you fix it, they go, oh yeah, I might have clicked a link. If you would have just told me that, we could have solve this much quicker. But I think it's that embarrassment factor of if I did something wrong, you're going to judge me. So your story is really powerful to say that they got past those two things of thinking, it might be nothing and also being worried about being embarrassed for the reach. Yeah, so Jeanette, I would ask you sort of advice for women who are thinking about entering these types of careers. I can ask it a whole bunch of different ways. Like, what do you wish you knew when you were younger? What do you think people are, something that might be holding them back? I'm not good at this, or I don't know that. Like, what advice would you give so people will sort of dip their toe in and find their path?
Sure. So I think that there's a few things. I think we all need to overcome the fear of it being more complex than it truly is. Again, there's lots of areas that you can start, but particularly now more than ever, there are women's groups, whether it's women in technology or women in cybersecurity, that are open-armed and want to embrace more people that have interest. So take a look, even just on LinkedIn, we're all connected there. There are lots of groups that you can belong to. Outside of that, just go on you want to learn more about cybersecurity, go and take a look at the different podcasts that are available. Listening to things like Darknet Diaries and not necessarily getting into the bowels of the ones and zeros. Listening to that helped me understand a little bit more about what the adversaries are doing and how companies are overcoming the challenges. And they tell it in a way that is really easy for me to understand and consume, and even help other people understand where the dangers are in the world that I can help with, right? Even just through having a conversation. And so there are many mediums that women can reach out to start to go down that path that I think are available more than ever. And we need people to go down those paths. So my number one bit of advice is don't be afraid, take that leap, look for the network, reach out. And there's lots of other people, men and women that really want to embrace bringing more women into cyber.
Yeah, good. Malika, I'm going to put you on the spot. Is there any question you wish we had asked here today before we wrap up in a few minutes?
Yeah, so I have a question for Jeanette, which some people have asked me, and as that I should ask Jeanette about the challenges that she was not from STEM background. What were the challenges you faced initially to be really successful that you're now at Palo Alto? So what were the challenges and what advice you would give to those young women that they could also be a part of cyber workforce not coming from STEM background?
I think the challenges are the same with any male dominated group, industry, market, what have you. It's overcoming the perception that we can't do what we really, really can do. Not letting that get into our head is the reason why we don't take that step forward. So walking into a room with all the confidence in the world, whether it's real or only 80%, making sure people know that you know how smart you are, you know how valuable you are, and you're going to help them understand where your value is in their world. So don't let any of these obstacles stand in front of you. Again, regardless of whether it's because you didn't come from a STEM background or, you know, whatever the reasons might be, don't let those stand as obstacles. Just enter the room with confidence, show people who you are and let them know that you're there. You're going to help them achieve their goals just as anyone else would.
So I'm going to throw you a tough question before we end. And I'll start with Michelle. What's a mistake you can remember making earlier in your career that you think, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? So whether that was a job you took that you felt, ill-fitted for, or a presentation you may have done that you thought you should have maybe reached out for more advice from someone.
So I'm not sure at the time it was a mistake, but looking back, I wish I hadn't had to do it. So I'll slightly rephrase it. And of course, this was when I was in uniform. I think I was a very young female in a position of authority as a young officer, having to manage groups of men that could have been my father. That they were all so much older than me and had so much more experience than me. And I think that the tactic I used was to be one of the boys and to not try to stand out as a woman, because I didn't want them to look at me as different. I wanted them to see me as capable as they were. And I think in retrospect, that decision, although it did well by me, I've had a good career. Looking back, I wish I hadn't had to do that. And my hope for young women coming through the process today is that you stand in yourself and be who you are and show them how that is absolutely good enough and is absolutely what they need in order to round things out. Women are fabulous collaborators and communicators, more so than our male counterparts, I would like to think. And I think even if you don't have the STEM background, the ability to communicate with the technical resources in a way to pull out of them what is required to solve the problem you're trying to solve, that's where your superpower lies. And I would want to see all women focus on our strengths as opposed to try to hide our differences going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I was sharing a story yesterday with a colleague that I can remember being, young at a young manager role, and someone saying to me, "You're just like one of the guys." And I said, "And I assume you mean that as a compliment." Like, it's not my goal, but okay, I'll take the compliment, right? So, I mean, same question to you, Jeanette, and maybe I like the way that Michelle sort of rephrased it. It may not be a mistake you made, but something you had to go through that was challenging, and that you hope is not happening still to young women.
Yeah, I definitely am in line with Michelle there. Her experience was very much the same as mine. The one area where I feel there's some improvement to be made is when we, I'll just use the analogy again, when we're sitting at a boardroom table with, multiple men, whether it's all or otherwise, understand that our voice is important. I think too many times I've spoken up, I've provided an opinion, I give my 2 cents, and I almost feel afterwards like it was rolled over and not accepted as the same voice as everyone else at the table. And I allow that to happen. And so it's something even now I continue to work on. If I feel that my point is valid, it's what people asked for and yet didn't receive for whatever reason, I make sure that it's heard again. So stepping back when I shouldn't be based on that is a mistake that I think I know I've made, I think other people make, we, make sure our voices are heard.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and something probably that happens to not just women, but maybe people with softer voices or with softer personalities even. And your point is quite valid for us to remember is, as you're making your point, if you're interrupted or ignored, to maybe continue making the point, not to give up and go, oh, well, they're not listening, right? So last question is the easiest one. Like, what is exciting about your career that if someone said, oh, you're in cyber, that sounds boring, what would you say? So I'll go to Jeanette first.
I was just going to say, it's all those dark stories that we hear about and we're not allowed to talk about. That's what I look forward to. Open up my email in the morning. Oh, these are the things that are happening. We don't talk about who they happen to, but they're real. That's very, very interesting and exciting to me. That's horrible, but it's true. It's cool stuff.
It's not a boring job. Yeah. And Michelle?
For me, it's how technology is converging into things that didn't used to be technology enabled. When you think about self-driving cars and remote medical procedures being conducted once 5G is fully rolled out, it's fascinating to me how we now have to port what we knew in a very traditional stance to protect a static network to now protect these dynamic capabilities that were frankly never designed to be internet enabled before, and how we actually get our heads around that. That's super fascinating.
Yeah, that's terrific. Thank you. Well, I could spend my day talking with you ladies, and your talent, your enthusiasm, and your experience are really motivating and inspiring to me. So I hope that everyone who attended today enjoyed themselves. And Malika, I will turn over to you.
Likewise, Kelly, I agree with you. It was an honor to spend the last hour with these distinguished women. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you all enjoyed the illuminating session. We want to keep the conversation going. Please connect with me and the rest of the panelists on LinkedIn. Have a nice day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.